I want to welcome to the stage Kelly Wadelska, Head of Global Knowledge at International Finance Corporation. Please welcome Kelly.
Good afternoon. Kelly Wadelska, Global Head of Knowledge, IFC, sister member of the World Bank Group, and also part of the World Bank Group's SOGI task force. So SOGI is sexual orientation, gender identity. Before I talk to you about the presentation, just a couple of caveats. One, I'm a knowledge manager by trade, so I believe in knowledge sharing. So I'm sharing lots of other people's ideas today. And two, in the spirit of sharing, I had a really bumpy plane ride into Seattle and experienced like the most amazing vertigo and nausea that I think I've ever had. Yesterday, I was laid up in bed, feeling very sorry for myself and terrible. So in the spirit of knowledge sharing, the Epley maneuver, if you ever have that horrible feeling, your inner ears have gone, the Epley maneuver has saved me, and that's why I'm on the stage today, because otherwise it would not be here. So, our conversation. What are we going to do in our time together? One, we're going to talk a bit about the development challenges that sexual and gender minorities face. Two, and I say this loosely, what the world is doing about it. Three, I'm going to introduce you to the LGBTI indicators. Four, I'm going to share with you what some of the specific problems around SOGI data is. And five, I'm going to ask you, what do you think, how could we get to better outcomes faster? So, development challenges. Lots of acronyms. SOGI-SEC, anybody know what that means? Sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sexual characteristics. MSM, men who have sex with men. WSW, women who have sex with women. LGBTIAQ, those ones are probably a little bit more familiar to you. All of these represent how people express their orientation and their identity. But there's lots of them, which is my first point. How many LGBT people do we think are out in the world? We can't count them yet. There's one on stage, obviously, but they go around unnoticed. So the numbers. A recent OECD report basically says that of those who self-identify in 2017, 4.5% of OECD countries identified as LGBT. That's up 1% since 2012. That's a pretty big social shift. And it seems to be, as you look at the demographic breakdown, that millennials are probably the most inclusive generation yet. That gives me great hope for the kind of change that we can actually deliver. So what are the challenges that LGBTQIA people face? Well, let's think about why this is a challenge to a person in society. Being a sexual and gender minority may impact many different bits of your lives. It can impact your support networks. It can impact your notion of family. It can impact your migration patterns. Where can you and do you want to work? It can impact your religious practice and your spirituality based on people's receptivity to you. It can impact your civic participation and also access to healthcare, education, and finance. So these challenges, violence, big challenge, and that exists across all countries. So this is physical violence that LGBTQ people face. This is psychological drama. That has an impact on your own productivity, causes fear, trauma, health issues, often leading to poor treatment when you head into hospital. Are you sure you're not going to face discrimination? So violence is a big challenge. The second piece is workforce discrimination. So it's very tough when you enter a new workplace. How do you know whether you're going to be received or not? Are you going to be received well? You've heard all the stories that LGBT people have to come out time and time again if they have the confidence. Sometimes even getting into workplace is a challenge because there's a non-formal job market. Oftentimes this means sex work. Again, that basically challenges the opportunity of the individual to express themselves and get access to those pieces of freedom that we all talk about. There's also, when we talk about violence, is a lack of state monitoring and levels of trust in the police. So it's also a challenge. Healthcare, we know from many, many studies that there are a lot of disparities. There's increased levels of depression, suicide, anxiety, HIV/AIDS. And interestingly, there's often a reliance, especially in developing countries, for families for healthcare. That's going to be a really big challenge if the person is actually rejected by their family. Access to education is another challenge. We see again from more and more studies that there's discrimination in schools. You've all heard it in the playground, the pointing, you look different, why are you effeminate, why do you look like a tomboy? All these challenges for children. This lack of awareness and tolerance leads to bullying and often assault. So all of that has an impact on a young child. So it's a really big challenge that we're trying to solve. And the challenge is there's no readily available or consistent country-level data about the lived experiences of all those different experiences of people, how they experience their sexual and gender identity. So, what is the world doing about it? And I say I use that loosely. I've got some examples here. Obviously, lots of stuff is going on. Think about social change, for example, and the US with its own LGBT rights. So social change, lots of different constructs within that, many levers. So you have policy and policy reform, so don't ask, don't tell, DOMA, and the reform of that and the impact that that has on lives. You have civic participation and riots. You all know the Stonewall riots. You've got economic power, and that's kind of cold, hard cash. So the pink pound, I'm sure you've all heard of, and also talent management. Business, especially international business, probably realized about 25 years ago that diverse and inclusion teams were probably better for business. They've spent the last 20 years actually working on that. Religious engagement is also another lever, and you've seen some examples of American churches coming out and being a little bit more engaging with LGBTQ people. And last but not least, popular culture, not to be sniffed at, as we say in the UK. So the role of Ellen on TV and Will and Grace had a normalizing effect for LGBT peoples in America. It allowed you to be seen and be seen in a safe environment. So, there's an example. What are we doing about it? So I work for a multilateral development bank, but there are obviously the agencies as well, so that's the UN. So we are working on indicators. We're working on data collection innovation. As I said, it's a bit challenging to capture data. So how could we actually innovate to capture some of those? How can we start to collate the methodology so other people can use it and replicate it? And then we're also working on a human capital index. So that's basically looking at access to education and healthcare and ranking countries, because nothing drives social change or any change other than ranking. I'd also like to say that the UN AIDS program have just launched an LGBT happiness survey. So if any of you are LGBT and you haven't taken the survey, go online, but it's going to give us a lot of global data. Academia, lots of researchers studying the challenges, focusing around development economics. And you see there the GILRHO, that's the Global Index on Legal Recognition of Homosexual Orientation from the World Development Journal, if you're interested. This has got a lot of really interesting stats, which policymakers are actually going to be using going forward. My favorite one is that a country has $2,065 more per capita for each additional point on the scale. So showcasing the actual economics behind inclusion seems to be the way forward, and especially with the policymakers. Private sector, and I talked a bit about this before. Inclusion is good for business. You want the best people working for you, and you want to make sure that they're productive. So, as I said, private sector have been working on this. And you see a lot of that with the Pride celebrations. Then you get to think tanks. This is basically, again, building the business case. And my favorite one here is the latest report by Open for Business. They're basically trying to prove that human rights equal human capital. And the cost of homophobia in Kenya is 1.7% of GDP. So how's everybody's conversion rates to US dollar? It's about 137 million. Similar study by the World Bank a couple of years earlier, which this was based on, found that the cost of homophobia in India, quite a lot of people there, was 1.7% of their GDP. That's pretty big. Imagine the opportunities, not only for the individual, but also from a growth and a development economics perspective. So think tanks are out there doing that. Civil society organizations are capturing local data and many other things. For example, there was a regional, it literally came out 2 days ago. There was a regional network of gay rights groups in the Latin American and Caribbean region which released new figures that 4 LGBT people are murdered every day in that geography. So capturing that data. Then you get to human rights organizations who are essentially building global and country data sets. So there's a very famous map, ILGA map, that's the International Gay and Lesbian Association. There's a map which actually shows the legality and discrimination that often LGBT people face. And some of those numbers you see there. 6, that's countries where the death penalty is in effect. 26, countries where you will get up to 10 years in prison. 31, countries where you'll get up to 8 years in prison. And 2, countries with de facto criminalization. The quest for better data, especially in this data-driven world. I mean, I'm a historian, so I think data's pretty binary and needs some interpretation, but the quest for data is totally critical, and all of this is coming together. So, the inclusion indicators. It's the challenge of getting to consistent data across countries. In 2015, the UNDP, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the World Bank got together a multi-sectoral group of experts and civil society representatives. Very important, and the mantra is, nothing for us without us. It's very great to be highfalutin and flying, but let's realize we're dealing with real people here. So civil society representatives are absolutely critical. And the idea was, how could we create some consistent levels and measures of inclusion? And the 5 you see there are economic well-being, political and civic participation, education, personal security and violence, and health. These were all chosen, and the data in them are chosen specifically because it can be disaggregated. Remember our LGBTQ MSM. Disaggregation is very important as we move forward. It's relevant across a wide range of countries. Obviously, there's lots of cultural differences about being LGBT across many different cultures, not only the names. Useful and easily understood, and then feasible to measure. And the data actually has 3 tiers. It's predominantly public sector data. So tier 1, data's available now. Tier 2, Resources are needed to collect data. That's expensive, especially for public sector organizations. And 3, data does not exist in the countries. So the next steps. The UNDP is looking at an inclusion index, a bit like the World Bank Group Human Capital Index. How could we rank inclusion gaps in countries? And as countries improve or not improve along the inclusion index, how could we then measure the impact of that on not only people's well-beings, but also their livelihoods and the growth of the organization? There's a UN group who are looking at challenges with capturing the data, which I'm going to talk a bit about next. And then the World Bank Group SOGI Task Force, which is where I'm representing today, is asking the question about the role of private sector data in these inclusion indicators. So, specific problems with SOGI data. Same problems with every other data set that you've all imagined, with an added kicker. As I said, it's criminalized and stigmatized in many, many countries. I think it's 69 countries, it's actually illegal and criminalized. That leads to discrimination, potential for blackmail, and also potential for death if the information gets out into some bad actors. The definition challenge is also, you saw all of the letters. So how do I define myself? How do you get around those definitions and people's experience, and especially with the millennials, around fluidity, which is what we are seeing more and more and more. How do we actually define the data that we want to capture? That links to identity. So who am I, and how do I feel at any one time? Does that move? The privacy challenge, which we all know. What rights do privacy do, and should people have, and how should they be applied in the LGBT context? Security, same challenge. How do we make sure that the data is totally secure because of the life and death opportunities and situations that LGBT people may face? And as a knowledge manager or information manager, the age-old challenge of sticking data in a repository and not maintaining it, not keeping it up to date, and then actually making sure that it gets used correctly. Where do we do that with all of these other challenges? And there is a high-end UN group, high-level UN group looking at these challenges. So how could we get to better outcomes faster? Remember our acronyms. Back to definitions over a lifetime, especially fluidity. Technology. We're all here, some of you on your phones. Captures our daily lives. Captures our daily lives and can offer a unique perspective on LGBTQ lives. Hands up if you've heard of Hornet. Hornet has 25 million users. It's a gay dating app. You can see some of the statistics up there. It's growing. It's a bit like Tinder, but it's the new Tinder, if that makes sense. It's already been used in a UNAIDS study to measure the differences in data to see if it can provide new insights into population data for men who have sex with men, rather than the traditional survey methods. So there's UNAIDS data in 18 countries. That's indicator 4.9. The Hornet numbers were higher in 9 countries. So the data that people felt comfortable with self-reporting via an app versus via a survey, 9 countries it was higher. 30% higher in 8 countries. So my question, how could we make change happen faster? By using access to this data with all the caveats. So we've started. And just to introduce you to the World Bank Data Collaborative. It's where we work with public and private sector partnerships to use data within certain parameters to make sure we get the right security to solve development challenges. And you can see Some of the latest opportunities are there. How Facebook are helping us with disease prevention maps. How Mapillary are helping us with tagged imagery. I think the private sector data has significant contributions to make to the SOGI agenda. And the next step for us at the task force is to explore the indicators with that private sector lens. I'd love to continue the discussion. You're all interested in data. There's my contact details. I'm on LinkedIn. Let's continue the discussion. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage our next speaker, Perla Nee, founder and CEO of Community Connect Labs. Please welcome Perla.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the census. I'm going to have you guys imagine a world where everyone counts. So how many of you guys have heard of the census? Raise your hand. Awesome. How many of you guys are working on census outreach? Raise your hands. Great. We have a couple already. How many of you guys are interested in working on census outreach? Woohoo! Awesome. All right. Hopefully this will be helpful for everyone today. So the census. How many of you guys know a renter? Have friends or family who rent? Great. How many of you guys know of an immigrant? There you go. How many of you guys know of a family that have children under 5? Lots of folks, good. So these are all populations of people who are likely to be undercounted in this coming census next year. What we do, we're a nonprofit. We're a boutique nonprofit focused on providing mobile messaging and other solutions to help nonprofits and government connect to those hard-to-count populations. So in addition to census, we do workforce training, assistance technologies, homelessness assistance technologies, EITC, LIHEAP, and low-income utilities, and lots of other fun stuff. Census is one of our focuses right now because it is so important. To give you guys a sense of what's at stake for the census, it is government funding, political representation, data for the business and the economy, as well as community-based services. So many nonprofit services are actually based upon the population in these counties where you work. So if you're legal aid, for instance, your funding from the county is dependent upon how many people are counted in your county. Just as an example, in the state of California, if you look at how much funding is dependent on how many people are counted, it is over $1,950 per year per person who's counted. Over the 10 years that the census is in effect, that's nearly $20,000. For California, an undercount would wipe out the entire state's budget surplus in just 1 year. And then if you see this breakdown of the social services that is funded through programmatic, formulaic formulas from the federal census, you can see it's healthcare, it is housing, it is free school lunches, variety of parks, roads, all those things that we care about that makes the quality of life in our communities are partially federally funded. The census, the federal government itself has rated the census as high risk for a variety of reasons, including there was a lack of early funding for the census, there's some technology risks, there's been the cancellation of 2 field tests, and there is currently a very difficult political environment for the census. Where we fit in is we've been working on the census for the last 2 years. We started out by working on LUCA, which is the local update of census addresses, where we engaged over 1,500 volunteers and staff across the country to go around and find low-income housing, because these are the places that the census is most likely to miss. Our approach to getting people counted is really meeting people where they are, and right now, that is typically through their mobile phones, either through SMS texting or mobile messaging. So we have a portfolio of 4 tools that we're rolling out for the census. The first one is a help desk that answers people's questions in 12 languages, 24/7. It's an AI powered chatbot with a backup of human assistance. The reason why this is so important is because this is the first online census. People have a lot of questions about data and privacy in the census, and they want to be able to easily, conveniently get these questions answered. We imagine that this would be used on the web or by texting. Libraries could promote it, nonprofits could promote it, and city and county governments could promote it as a way to get your census questions answered. Another tool is our Pledge to Be Counted tool. This is a way to really activate your base of folks to get involved in the census. So they get a cool digital Pledge to Be Counted card, and they automatically received timed reminders and nudges next March and April when they should be expecting the census form. So next year is going to be kind of a crazy year, and the census form will be in there in people's mailboxes underneath all the political mailers and other mailers that we get. And so we want to make sure that people do not miss their census forms. So that's the reason why reminders and nudges and other types of encouraging messages are really important. The census also needs help in terms of people applying for jobs to work as enumerators. Enumerators are the people who knock on the doors of the hardest to count people and do the enumeration in person. These are great jobs, and they're looking for people who speak multiple languages and people who come from these hard to count communities. So if you guys know of a college student, a retired person, or really anyone who wants to make some extra money on weekends and nights, this is a great job. We have created a tool that basically is like a virtual job coach to help people through the process of applying for these jobs. And lastly, we have a tool called the Misinformation Reporter. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation about the census, and there's going to be even more. And we want communities to know what's happening, and especially for nonprofits and government leaders to know what is being heard on the streets and to be able to respond to it. We are a tech provider, and we partner with nonprofits who are the trusted messengers in this case. We have seen the power of these nonprofits in the work that we have done from San Jose all the way to Central Falls, Rhode Island. They're able to get people to trust in them. They're able to get the messages through, and they're the ones in the community who are going to be responsible for getting the hardest to count folks counted. Technology is a huge part of what we do. Obviously, in all these communities, people are very sensitive about their data, especially in this climate. They're very sensitive about what we're going to do with their data after the census. It's really important for us in everything that we do. We message to folks how this data is confidential, how it's going to be deleted after the census, and that we're just providing a service to them to help them get more information and get connected. There's many ways in which Amazon is a big part of our story, including helping us identify threats, responding to threats, identifying intrusions, responding to intrusions. We work with many great partners in the technology world as well as in the wider world. We collaborate with the Census Bureau, we collaborate with local governments as well as local nonprofits. So looking forward, we're really excited and would love to talk to any of you guys who are interested in partnering on working on census outreach. It is anywhere you guys are based, whether you're in Florida, you're in Arizona, you're in Washington State, you can do something about the census, and there's a role for every one of you guys to play. So if you're interested, come and see me. Thanks so much.